Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Happy 4th of July. I'm reading a book about Jay Gould. And I don't know how many of you know about Jay Gould, but he's quite an infamous character. And there was a time when he tried to control the gold market. And so I felt that perhaps reading a short part of this book might influence some of you to go out and read some more, and perhaps we could talk about this alleged manipulation and market forces and etc. So I won't read too much, maybe 3 or 4 pages. So we're talking about 1869. So, until the end of 1861, the federal government had contributed only coinage to the national money supply. All paper currency had emanated from the state-chartered banks, which issued notes backed by their depositors. Early in the Civil War, however, the National Banking Act and the Legal Tender Act set up nationally chartered banks with the power to issue currency backed by government bonds. At the same time, the U.S. Treasury began issuing non-redeemable notes, some 400 million in greenbacks not backed by gold, that allowed the government to pay for the Civil War but caused great inflation. Starting in 1865, the government slowly began to withdraw these greenbacks from circulation. This withdrawal led to a fall in the price per ounce of gold early, from nearly 300 greenbacks in 1865 to 130 greenbacks by early 1869. Of course, in addition to adjusting the amount of currency in circulation, the U.S. Treasury could also influence the greenback price of gold through carefully calculated sales from the million-ounce gold hoard in the Federal Reserve. In 1862, traders had set up a formal gold room next to the New York Stock Exchange. 4 years later, various members of the exchange organized the Gold Exchange Bank, which was a clearinghouse that by 1869 averaged $70 million in greenback business every day, the lion's share of this trade being transacted on margin. As Gould later explained to a congressional investigating committee, a man with $100,000 of money and with credit can transact a business of $20 million. The later figure coincidentally being the total gold available in New York City at the time. Hello, manipulation. Although the United States was slow to get back into the firm gold standard after the Civil War, the rest of the world had never left it. Therefore, all the American merchants involved in exports were forced to pay for domestic goods and commodities using fluctuating greenbacks before selling these goods overseas for gold. For American importers, of course, this process reversed itself, but still involved the same dilemma of exposure to unpredictable greenback values. To protect themselves, explained Maury Klein, merchants paid a premium to borrow gold and sold it for the greenbacks needed to make their purchases. After a foreign exchange house discounted his bill, the merchant took the gold, paid him, and returned it to the loaner. This was in theory the legitimate business function of the gold exchange, but it also offered choice opportunities for speculation. Merchants who borrowed in this manner were in effect short of gold. A fall in the price could wipe out their profits on business transactions. However, a sharp rise in gold required merchants to put up fresh margins in greenbacks against what they had borrowed. In the process, some might go bankrupt before their bills were discounted abroad. If speculators could control the available supply of gold, they could use the frantic buying of merchants who were short to help run the price up. So, going into the summer of 1869, Jay Gould began to consider a serious move to corner gold, and he did so with 2 agendas. First, of course, he hoped to make a speculative killing, but he also sought to raise chronically depressed commodity prices and thus built up the Erie's farm freight hauling business. So Jay Gould is a major stockholder of the Erie Railroad. Gould realized that a sharp decline in the value of greenbacks against gold would stimulate American agricultural exports by making Western wheat and grain, not to mention Southern cotton, relatively cheap for gold-based foreign markets to buy and more profitable for American farmers paid in greenbacks for their crops to sell. So I guess a perfect storm, right? So President Grant had stated categorically that it was undesirable to force down the price of gold. Immediately after his chat with Grant, Gould instructed his allies to begin buying gold contracts even faster than before, pushing most of his personal trades through his old firm of Smith, Gould, and Martin. Jay told his colleague Smith to work through a number of sub-brokers in order to avoid the appearance of orchestration. By mid-September, Gould's pool controlled contracts far in excess of the amount of gold to be found anywhere in New York outside federal vaults. Gould alone held contracts valued at $25 million, and other members of his group possessed contracts totaling $65 million or more. The following Monday, the 20th, the story of what was going on in the gold market leaped from the editorial and finance pages to the front page of The Sun, announcing that the alliance of the most powerful and influential firms in Wall Street, including the notorious Erie speculators, had been effected with a view of obtaining the exclusive possession of all the gold in the market. It's a perfect storm, right? So there were a number of other bear raids and whatnot, and it kind of continues on. I don't want this to be too long a video. So on the morning of Friday the 24th of September, the day to be known ever after as Black Friday, the New York Times' Caleb Norvell ran an outraged piece describing Thursday's action. Fisk's presence in the gold room was signalized by the rapid rise in gold, and the other engineers of the movement were not idle. They had not only bullied gold, but with a will, but talked freely of the warrant which they had from Washington that the government would not interfere with them. The highest official in the land was quoted as being with them, and he, of course, controls the sanctions of the Secretary of the Treasury and the New York Assistant Treasurer. Although this must have been known to be false, there were abundant rumors and suspicions insidiously spread around the street to create the belief or fear with good men that the administration would not impose any further sales of gold from the Treasury. Through the morning, the price moved to a high of $162, destroying literally hundreds of bearish brokers and merchants who were forced to settle their margin accounts on terrible terms. Sound familiar? At the same time, banks in San Francisco, where there was still plenty of gold, found themselves inundated with pleas from New York for wire gold transfers. These requests were ignored as the San Francisco bankers feared causing a shortage on the West Coast. Then shortly before noon, word came that Boutwell had increased $4 million in government gold. He released $4 million in government gold through Brown Brothers. By 12:30, the price had settled to $135. Amid the chaos that followed, depending on their position, brokers and merchants hustled to either repudiate or enforce contracts made in the madness of the market at the peak of its high. The Gold Exchange Bank nearly collapsed under the weight of the transaction, many in dispute, that needed clearing. And of course, all around the world, there was this kind of insane rush to close out their contracts. Nearly 1,000 individual investors were bankrupted on that day's activity. 14 brokerage houses went under, along with several banks. When the Days, Jay Gould and Fisk finally departed Heath's building out the back door on Friday evening, they brought their guards with them and thereafter holed up for a full 2 days at the Erie Management Building, which is basically a fortified castle near New York. So in the long term, the gold corner was to cost Gould even more dearly than the way of his tarnished reputation. So can the market be manipulated? You're damn straight it can be. At least it can be in 1869. At least that's how I read this, right? However, it seems that there was quite a cost on the operators who engineered this run on gold, and their reputation was tarnished, and they were pretty much brought before Congress and whatnot. So I personally believe that the price can be manipulated. It doesn't mean that I believe it is being manipulated, just that it can be. That's a no-brainer. I mean, it's already been done. It can be done again, right? So I think our lowly, us regular working stiffs are basically left, either worrying about their margin, which we already know has happened with some of the holders of the previous crises, right? So what are we going to do, right? So I guess we're just going to buy and hold and hope for the best, and if the market is manipulated, we're along for the ride.